it's said that the lotus flower, the beautiful lotus flower, does not grow in soil which is just on high ground. Does not grow in soil which is in a nice garden that's just cultivated. The lotus flower grows only in mud. The lotus plant only grows in a very muddy, kind of marshy, swampy area. It doesn't grow in a garden where there's not a lot of water, or there's not a lot of kind of irrigation. The lotus flower needs a muddy, swampy, messy kind of soil to grow in. But the lotus flower is very beautiful, looks very pure. And this kind of metaphor that we often hear about in Buddhism is, what it means is, you're not going to find wisdom without ignorance. You're not going to find wisdom aside from ignorance. So if you want to find wisdom, you must look into where your ignorance began, where you are mistaken in your thinking. Look at your own faults. Look at your own mistaken thinking, your assumptions, your mistaken conceptions, concepts about the world, and there you'll find wisdom. Just like we ask these, that's how we ask these kind of questions. For example, just as I said to you before, when did the earth start turning? Or other kind of questions, like, when was the first human being born into this world? Now, many people might say, well, there's the Neanderthal man, or the Cro-Magnon, man was born 50 million years ago, or whatever. And yet, scientists are not sure, because there's still new discoveries made. Well, sometimes they can put a date on it, but many times not sure when the first human being actually appeared. This, if you ask somebody who's practiced Zen or studied Zen, it's a very easy question to answer. When was the first human being born into this world? All you need to really attain is, what is birth? What's the meaning of birth? But people like to think about, well, what's a human? And was it an ape, or was it a human? And so on and on and on, this debate goes on about, some people say evolution, some people now talking about, in my country, some people are talking about some kind of magic creation. What's that thing they say? Intelligent design, like God made some design and the first human being was born. And there's a big argument about how to educate children now. Was it like intelligent design, or was it evolution? And yet there's no conclusion to that. This kind of argument can go on and on and on. Because birth is not something that changes. Birth is just birth. Whether it be the birth of a monkey, or the birth of an ape, or the birth of a human being. Birth remains the same. Birth is just what it is. And so if we attain that, then we don't have to argue about that point. But many times we argue about that point. And in our Buddhist practice, we can find out what it is to be what truly it is to be wise. And to be wise is not just to be an older person. It doesn't mean you have to wait till you're retired and over 65 to be wise. All it means is that we look at ourselves, and rather than blame others for what we see is wrong in ourselves, which is our common way of thinking, rather than blame others, we look at ourselves and we see the assumptions, the concepts, the ideas that we held, and we question those. And we see the good in others rather than see the bad things in them. This is not so easy to do. Our usual tendency is to blame things outside ourselves. The most common tendency is to first blame our parents. It was my parents' fault. They didn't give me the right background or development when I was a child. And parents tend to blame themselves too. I didn't do the right thing for my children, so my son turned out rotten. And this is a really foolish, actually, way of thinking, because we don't realize that all things start with our own mind. All things start inside ourselves. They all start with our own way of thinking about the world. Yet we tend to blame things outside. Blame our mother, blame our father, blame our background, blame our country, blame our teachers, blame our education or our lack of it, all these things. But actually everything starts right inside here, right where I am. And much of Buddhist teaching is about that. Understand truly who you are. Understand that you created this world. Nobody else. Not God, not Buddha, nothing else. You made your world. So you have your world. So my teacher, Zen Master Sung San, often said, cat has cat world. Dog has dog's world. American people have American's world. Korean people have Korean world. They make their world. Also, a cow has a cow's world. Tiger has a tiger's world. What kind of world does a cow have? Maybe cow's world is about chewing on sweet grass. What kind of world does a cat have? Cat's world maybe is just, where is the mouse? Where is the where is the something they can catch? So you make your world. What kind of world do you have? This is a really important point. So Sixth Patriarch lived in time that was, in fact, much simpler than the world we live in today. When he lived, the time he lived, which was maybe, let's say, almost 2,000 years ago. That's maybe 2,000 years ago, I think. Not 2,000, that's too long. Maybe 1,500 years ago. That time, they had no cars. They didn't have they didn't have any computers. Didn't have any televisions. All these kind of modern age things they didn't have. So in some way, it was a much simpler world. So his teaching was very simple and straight to the point. He told his students, read the Diamond Sutra. Read the Diamond Sutra and your minds will become clear and you will be able to understand what is wisdom. Very simple teaching. But nowadays, yeah, some people read the Diamond Sutra and they feel like they get clear. But most people, one time read it is not enough. So I have to read it many times. Many, many times. One time, not enough. Many times practice it. Read it again and again and again. Not only one sutra, also some people only read the Diamond Sutra, then become attached to the Diamond Sutra. So nowadays we practice not only one sutra, but read different sutras and we practice meditation. It's very, very important. So Zen is a meditation, or Koreans say sun. So if we practice meditation, then that also helps us clearly understand what the sutras are about. Sutra means that which was spoken by the Buddha or the Patriarch, the speech. Maybe if somebody really liked this lecture, they could make this into a sutra too. So if this lecture was really considered very valuable, maybe it could be a sutra also. Sutra is some long train of thought, some long speech. We say Zen or sun is the mind of the Buddha. Sutra is a speech of the Buddha, speech of a Buddha. And we say precepts or sila, what is called here sila, is the behavior of a Buddha. We have this teaching about behavior. So if we only talk about being good, but we don't behave accordingly, that's also a problem. So good conduct should be followed, good intentions should be followed by also by good conduct. So our speech and our conduct are not different. Now, moving right along. And by the way, if you have any question you would like to ask during this talk, please feel free to put up your hand and ask. I'm very open to questions. Now, if we look on the bottom of page 4 of the second chapter, the Sixth Patriarch talks about the Diamond Sutra, and he recommends that many people recite and study the Diamond Sutra, which will enable you to realize your true nature. Now, why did he recommend that? He recommended that because it was upon hearing the Diamond Sutra that the Sixth Patriarch himself attained enlightenment. He heard the Diamond Sutra when he was just a young man or a young boy, almost teenager, and he was helping his mother, as we talked about earlier, he's helping his mother, and he went to the market and he sold the wood to help his mother, and he heard the Diamond Sutra, and that at that point he got enlightenment. So he always recommends to his students that they hear the Diamonds, that they practice the Diamond Sutra, that they recite the Diamond Sutra. And he goes on to say on page 5, the prajna immanent in the true nature of every person may be likened to a rain, which refreshes every living thing, trees and plants, as well as sentient beings. Now, this is interesting because he says that everybody has prajna inside themselves. Everybody has the capacity for wisdom. And he compares wisdom to a rain. So, one thing interesting, if there's too much rain, many times a whole village is flooded out, or people lose their homes, especially people whose homes are near a river. They will lose their homes and they will suffer immensely. And the Sixth Patriarch talks about that, and he says, those people whose capacity is very small, when the rain of wisdom, when the rain of prajna comes down, they are at a loss what to do. And they're like people whose houses were in a flood. And they're like swimming through the water, but they're helpless. And they don't know how to get to dry land. And they're like lost in this water. And he said most people are like that they have this prajna rain coming down, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know that this rain actually, which refreshes every living thing, trees and plants as well as sentient beings, this rain is actually wisdom. So the Sixth Patriarch talks about when rain comes in a deluge, plants which are not deep-rooted are washed away, and eventually they succumb. This is the case with the slow-witted when they hear the teachings of the sudden school. Sudden school meaning the Zen school. The prajna immanent within themselves is exactly the same as that in the wisest of men, but they fail to enlighten themselves when the Dharma is made known to them. So this is a very interesting point, and the point is that for those people whose minds are wide and whose capacity is big, this prajna, this rain of prajna, is like very refreshing, and they welcome it, and it opens them up to many different things. But those people who are not kind of rooted, who are not deep-rooted, they are kind of washed away. Plants which are not deep-rooted are washed away. So if we don't have a strong kind of basis, a strong kind of roots, then it's very easy to become washed away when this wise teaching is given. And then the Patriarch goes on to say, prajna does not vary among persons. What makes the difference is whether one's mind is enlightened or deluded. And that's an interesting point. So he many times said, the prajna that you have inside you is no different than the prajna I have inside myself. Many times he said that. Everybody has the same wisdom. Only the difference is whether your mind is clear or not, whether your mind is enlightened or not. And when we use the word enlightened, we mean whether your mind is clear, whether you've been able to clear out the illusions, clear out the anger and the greed that most people carry around in their mind and consider their treasure, actually. Many people carry around this kind of greedy mind and carry around this anger and consider it their treasure. So if we can empty our minds of these three things, then we can experience this wisdom, this rain of wisdom, which then helps us grow in many ways. We can grow inside. So then he goes on to say, learned audience, don't attach to inside or outside. be free to come or go without hindrance. One who is able to do this is of the same standard required by the Sutras of the Prajna school. So he refers to the Prajna school as the wisdom school. And the Sutras of the wisdom school are the Sutras of the Mahayana. And we go on to page 5. And he says something very interesting, page 6. Let's go on to page 6. He says, if there were no human beings, there would be no dharmas. Therefore, we know that all dharmas are made for the human beings, and that all sutras owe their existence to humanity. Okay, that's an interesting point. So, if there's no human beings, there's no dharmas. All dharmas were taught for the sake of human beings. They were not taught for the sake of dharma itself. So all the different kind of dharmas in the 84,000 sutras that we have, if you want to see the 84,000 sutras, one time you go to Heze and look at the blocks. They're all there. All these dharmas were taught for the sake of human beings to get out of their suffering, to get out of their delusion. Or we say illusions. So if you don't have any illusions, you don't need all those dharmas. You don't need the 84,000 sutras. But who here has no illusions? Everybody has some illusions. It's very hard to find somebody who is completely free of elusive thinking. Everybody has some illusions. So we need these 84,000 kinds of dharma or teachings. Since some people are wise, the so-called superior person, and some are ignorant, inferior people, the wise preach to the ignorant when the latter asks them to do so. Because of this, the ignorant may attain sudden enlightenment and their minds illuminated. Then they are no longer different from wise people. So what he's pointing out is that really we all share the same nature. We all share the same fundamental substance. We all have the same thing. We say in Korean, they say the same bonsong. We all have that same bonsong or bonche, substance, original nature. But because we don't allow or we don't clear our minds completely, we experience somebody being wise and somebody being foolish. We notice the difference between wise action and foolish action. We notice the difference between greedy action and generous action. Somebody's very generous, and we experience that. They help us with their generosity. Somebody's very greedy. They're always demanding more. We don't want to be around that person so much. If they're always greedy, always demanding more and more, it's difficult to be with them. Here's an example. One man was doing some kind of business. One Korean gentleman that we knew was doing a business, and at the end of the day of his business, he was always counting his money. He would count all the money he had. And in his room, in his house, he had a safe. He would take the money back to his house and would put it in the safe. And his whole life, he spent very little on his family, very little on himself, and only kept this money in the safe, stacking up many kinds of all this money. And of course, when he got old, it's very difficult for him because he was very concerned who this money would go to and how this money would be used. And he was reluctant to part with this money even when he was dying. Now, everybody knows when you're dying, you can't take any money with you. So you have to decide who it will be given to. You have to write a will. You have to do something like that. But this man, he was very unhappy that even to leave this money to his family, because he thought that this money needed to grow. It needed to be just in the safe and just getting bigger. But finally, with a lot of suffering, he died. And his son, of course, inherited this money. And when his son got this money, he felt very bad about using even using this money was difficult because his father had his whole life just sacrificed everything and experienced very little happiness and very little kind of generosity to share this with other people. So this is a very common kind of example of what happens when we're too greedy. And many times we have the idea that we're going to carry something with us. But as we know, when you die, there's nothing you can take with us. Whether it's a big stack of money or whether it's a very close person to you, there's no way that these can go with you. So we often need to remind ourselves that we need to change this, what we call greed, into generosity. We change this hatred or anger, we change that into, we change it, as I said before, we change this hatred or anger, we change that into meditation, samadhi. And samadhi means pure bliss, blissful meditation. And then we change this illusion or ignorance, we change that into prajna, wisdom. Are there any questions? Poem. I don't know why when they edited it they didn't take out this word, but I guess stanza is still a word that's used nowadays. I have a formless stanza for all of you to recite. Both laity and monks should put its teaching into practice, without which it would be useless to remember my words alone. So Sixth Patriarch was very generous. He's very kind. He said, it's not going to be possible for you to remember all my words, but I'm going to give you this poem. And this is a beautiful poem that he wrote. And one of the most, the part of this poem that really stands out for me, that I always like the most, is on the page 9, the next page. It's quite a long poem. And he says here, in the middle of the page, on page 9, are you with me? Okay. On page 9, a true practitioner of the way does not see the mistakes of the world. If you find faults with others, you yourself are already in the wrong. When people are in the wrong, we should ignore it, for it is wrong for us to find fault. By getting rid of the habit of fault finding, we cut off defilement. When neither hatred nor love disturb our mind, serenely we sleep. That's very kind, actually, what he said. So many people are very critical, and sometimes the kind of critical analysis is valued in our jobs. If we are critical and we're able to critically analyze something and criticize those who have not really penetrated to the matter, we are rewarded in our jobs, and especially in today's world. But if we use that critical, analytical mind to find faults with others, then we also make some fault ourselves. And by finding faults with others, we get into a bad habit, this habit of fault finding. So the Sixth Patriarch says, if you can cut off that habit, getting rid of that habit of fault finding, you will have neither hatred nor love disturbing your mind. So even love was considered a disturbance to the mind, and you will sleep serenely. So this is his poem, a very interesting point that he made here. Also, he goes on to say here, if you look further down on page 9, Buddha Dharma is in this world. Enlightenment is also found in this world. If you search for Bodhi, Bodhi means you search for peace. Outside of this world, it's like looking for a rabbit's horn. Right view means to transcend the world. Wrong view is called worldly. When both right and wrong views are completely taken away, the nature of Bodhi appears. True peace appears. So this poem or stanza is the teaching of the Sudden School. It is also called the Great Ship of Dharma. Deluded people can listen to the sutras for kalpas, but enlightenment can be attained in an instant. So that's another reason that his school was called the sudden school, because enlightenment can be attained in an instant. But delusions can go on for kalpas. Kalpas means a very, very long period of time. And after all the people heard this, the governor Wei, the government officials, Taoists, and laymen were all enlightened, and they exclaimed, "Well done, well done. Who would have expected that a Buddha was born in Guangdong?" So Guangdong is, by the way, is right now, if you want to find where Guangdong is, it's the area of China that's called Canton, Guangdong province, nowadays Gwangju, very, very close to Hong Kong. Okay, so we finished chapter 2 today. We completely finished chapter 2. Are there any questions about this? Anything people like to ask about? No problem.